series that Pastor Andy started last week in the book of Philippians. So we'll be in Philippians chapter 1, verses 12 through 19 tonight as we continue in this series. Before we get into that, though, a couple questions for you. I always like to open up with some engaging questions. So here we go. How many of you know people that are just genuinely miserable? They are never happy. They can't see the good in anything. And because of it, they're just hard to be around. Okay? So how many of us know people like that? All right. A lot of hands there. Okay. How many of you would be honest enough to say you are that person? It is okay. I'm getting ready to call some of you out in just a minute. Okay, now let's flip it a little bit. Now, how many of you know people who are or seem to be just overly joyous, that seem to always, no matter what the situation, no matter what the circumstance they're facing in life, they're still happy and they're joyous? They see the good in everything. So how many of us know people like that? Okay. So next question. How many of you find those people annoying? I told you I was going to set you up. See, nobody raised their hands to say, I'm that miserable person. But yet, when we encounter those overly joyous people, they annoy us. Some of you admitted that on the second part of that. What I like about the transformation of Paul's life, it has always been intriguing to me, because when you study the life of Paul, you see that through Scripture and throughout the New Testament, we see him on both ends of the spectrum, as a miserable guy and as a overly joyous guy. We see a guy who started out as a miserable Christian hater. He hated followers of the way. He hated those who called themselves Christ followers, until the day that he encountered Christ himself. And when he encountered Christ himself, he became one of the greatest joyful Christian leaders of all time. And you see that transformation in his life. And as Pastor opened up our series last week with the first part of Philippians 1, we talked about joy and how Paul was such a joyous person, and how joy ought to be a part of who we are in our lives. And so we're going to pick up in verse 12 tonight and continue to see Paul having a joyful heart and a joyful attitude no matter what he's facing at the moment in life. So let's look at the first couple verses there, 12 to 14. It says, I want you to know, my dear brothers and sisters, that everything that has happened to me here has helped to spread the good news. For everyone here, including the whole palace guard, knows that I am in chains because of Christ. And because of my imprisonment, most of the believers here have gained confidence and boldly speak God's message. And we're going to go all the way to 19 before we're done tonight, but I want to stop right there, because Paul opens up this section of Philippians as a reminder to everyone else who's not in prison with him, to the other believers, to say, hey, I know this seems bad, and I know this doesn't look good, but you've got to understand that all of this that's happened to me has been a good thing. It's actually been a great thing, because now I'm here, but I want you to know that everybody else that's here knows why I'm here. They know why I'm here. They know I'm not a criminal. They know that I'm not here because I created some crime. They know that I'm in chains and I'm bound because of Christ. And he says, everybody knows it. He said, he starts there with verse 12. He says, everything that has happened to me here has been good for the spreading of the good news. It's been good for the spreading of the gospel. So, it may not be the way I wanted to come to Rome, but in me getting to Rome this way, it's been a good thing because the gospel is still being spread. Then he goes even further and he says, everyone here, including the whole palace guard, knows that I am in chains because of Christ. He leaves nothing to chance. He said, everybody knows. Everyone knows why I'm here. Everyone knows that I'm here, including the palace guard. See, in the Roman prisons back then, he was chained and he was under guard 24/7. They took shifts. And some scholars even say that he wasn't just chained to a brick wall, he was actually chained to a guard. So one of the guard's duties was to be stuck with this guy his whole shift. So when Paul's telling them, hey, everybody here knows, including the palace guard, they know because they can't get away from me. They're stuck with me. We're making a difference, not just in other believers in Rome. We're making a difference with the Roman centurions. We're making a difference with the palace guards because they're stuck with me. They don't have a choice. It's their lot in life. It's their duty to be here with me. So they know that I'm here because of Christ. And they're going to know about Christ, whether they want to or not. They're going to hear it. I can only imagine, as you know how we started off about those joyous people being annoying. Sometimes I wonder how annoyed the palace guard got at Paul. Does this guy ever stop? Will he ever quit? Would somebody please tell him to shut up? He is just over the top annoying. See, Paul, he was a rare breed, I'd have to say, because when we read this and we look at it, if I put myself in the picture here, I would have been, I'd have been a miserable old coot. I'd have been miserable. I've been like, Jesus, you let me down. God, you just left me hung out to dry here. I'm supposed to be doing all that you've called me to do, and this is what I get. In my natural flesh and tendency, that's probably how I would have reacted. I'd have been mad at God. I'm like, I ain't telling this dude about you. Look where it got me. And that is the stance that we take from time to time when we feel like God's let us down. But Paul was filled with joy to the point that he says, you know what? It's because of Christ that I'm here. And because he put me here, I'm going to take full advantage of it. And everybody's going to know why I'm here. Including the palace guard. And he says, and because of my imprisonment, most of the believers here have gained confidence and boldly speak God's message without fear. See, I love that because Paul, his attitude in the midst of suffering, his attitude in the midst of a bad situation was an encouragement to other believers to be bold in their faith as well. when I read that and when I look at that and when I study his life and his mission, it reminds me that sometimes my attitude, or not just sometimes, all the time, the attitude that I carry and the way I react to situations and circumstances that I face in life has an impact not just on me personally, but it has an impact on everybody else around me, including other believers. And because Paul kept a joyous heart and a great attitude, and we see that in these first 3 verses here of 12 through 14, the results of his suffering. We see Paul's perception of the results of his suffering, and we see his positive and good attitude. We see it making a difference in the lives of the believers who weren't in prison to be bold enough to share their faith as well. And to be bold enough to continue the advancement of the gospel and of the good news. And he saw it all as a good thing. He could have been miserable, but he wasn't. He saw it all as a good thing. So the first 3 verses there of this section is dealing with Paul's perception and dealing with how he viewed what was happening in his life, and him being joyously encouraging to everyone else in writing this letter to say, hey, don't give up hope. Don't quit. Stay the course. Everything that's happened to me is a good thing. We read in Scripture and we see that he wasn't the first guy to have this attitude either. If we go all the way back to Genesis, you see that there was a guy named Joseph who had this very same attitude. And when his brothers sold him into slavery and he went to work for Potiphar, and then he ended up in prison on a false claim, he found favor with everybody that he came in contact with, and he kept a positive attitude. And one day he ended up in the palace as number 2 in control of all of Egypt. And when he was when he came in contact with his brothers again, when he could have took vengeance on them, he reminded them, say, look, you meant it for harm. God meant it for good. You meant it for bad, but God meant it as a good thing. Because now he's using me, and he's given me wisdom to save not just the Egyptians, but all of our people as well. To save nations. He's put me in this place, and it's a good thing. So let's move on to 15 to 19, and we're going to see Paul continuing to have a good attitude as a result of some people who were not necessarily doing right things. 15 says, it's true that some are preaching out of jealousy and rivalry, but others preach about Christ with pure motives. They preach because they love me, for they know I have been appointed to defend the good news. Those others do not have pure motives as they preach about Christ. They preach with selfish ambition, not sincerely, intending to make my change more painful to me. But that doesn't matter. Whether their motives are false or genuine, the message about Christ is being preached either way. So I rejoice, and I will continue to rejoice. For I know that as you pray for me, the Spirit of Jesus Christ helps me. This will lead to my deliverance. I like this because Paul is essentially reminding those that there are some people who do things from a pure heart, and there are some people who don't. They do it for selfish ambition and selfish gain. He essentially would say, in modern day English terms, he would tell them that, hey, there's some Christian troublemakers out there. There are some Christian troublemakers. Have you ever known people who were just troublemakers? That no matter where they went, trouble followed. You ever known someone like that? How many of you know people like that? Like, trouble is their middle name. Or we like to call them sometimes pot stirrers. You know what a pot stirrer is? Not someone who physically stirs a pot, but it's a figurative term for somebody who's always getting stuff started. And then they get it stirred up and get it really heated, and then they go sit back and watch the fireworks and the show. You know what I'm talking about? And that's what Paul's kind of talking about here. He's saying, yes, I realize that there are some people out there who are preaching out of jealousy and rivalry. But know that while they're out there doing that out of a false motive, there are also people out there preaching with pure motives. While there's some out there whose heart may not really be in the right place in what they're doing, there are others who are doing it with the right heart and the right way. And so Paul's addressing the concerns that people have about preaching out of envy and jealousy. And when you read on this, you'll see that some people are arguing whether those who are preaching out of envy and jealousy were even believers or not. And then there's some who say, well, yeah, they have to be believers because they're preaching about Christ. And so their defense to that is saying, well, they're not really, they're believers, and so they're not anti-Christ. They're just anti-Paul. They believe in Christ, but they don't really like Paul. And so they're preaching to make a name for themselves. And they're preaching out of envy or jealousy because they want to be known as Paul is known, or they want more of the attention instead of him because they don't really like him. And we may not want to admit this, but that happens even in the church. Preachers are guilty of this. We get jealous of each other. It happens. That's the human side of being a preacher. Honestly, I don't like standing up here following Pastor Andy. I don't like following Nate. I hear them preach and I'm like, why do they ever put me up there? Like, that was terrible. If we're not careful, even not from a platform standpoint, as we go about being the light in a dark world as believers of the way and as believers in Christ, we can have envy and jealousy come up inside of us to say, well, why should I do this? Because I'm not as fluent or as good as they are. I'm not really going to make a difference. Or we'll do it to say, okay, I need some of the attention here. We really have to guard against that. And so it doesn't matter whether they're believers or whether they weren't. Or Paul here, I love what he's doing when he's writing this letter. He's acknowledging the fact that something is happening that the Philippians are concerned about. He's acknowledging a fact that, hey, I know what's happening. I know that there are people out there who are preaching because they're jealous. I know that there's people out there who are doing things out of envy. I know that they're doing things with the wrong motives. But you've got to understand that there are also people out there who are doing it right. And what you also have got to understand is, regardless of the heart that they're doing it in, the good news of Jesus Christ, the gospel, is still being preached. And because of that, I choose to rejoice. because of that, I will rejoice. And that's what he's telling them. He said, we can't always control the motives in which people do stuff. But I will rejoice in the fact that the gospel is being preached. See, Paul, he tells them, he says, whichever it is, don't let it be a distraction, but rejoice because Christ is being preached either way. And like I said, this is a struggle sometimes. And I'm just going to be transparent with you right now and honest. I've been guilty, not of preaching out of jealousy or envy, but I would have been the person that Paul was writing this letter to, because it perturbs me sometimes, and I know some of you are probably going to fall in this category, of how irritated we get with, send me $1,000, I'll send you a prayer cloth, and God's going to send you $10,000. You know, and we've talked about what a bad rap it gives Christianity and all that. And honestly, I was reading this week and studying and praying, and God checked me in that a little bit and said, you know, you've been guilty of this. Because I do. I'll turn on Christian television, and as soon as I hear it, I turn it off. I'm like, I ain't watching that garbage. And they're doing more harm than good. And I read this letter again today and this week from Paul, and I'm like, you know what? Paul's right. It may not be the way that I would approach it. It may not be something that I would do. That's definitely not the heart that I would have. But what about the lives that have been touched through the ministry? What about the lives that have been changed? You know, it may not be the way I thought it ought to have been done, but the gospel was preached. People heard about Christ. Because of that, I have to rejoice. I have to rejoice in that. Paul goes on to say, you know, some people do things with the wrong motives, others do things with pure heart. Here's the thing. You can do the right thing the wrong way. It is possible to do the right thing the wrong way. And I really believe that's what Paul was saying here. He's saying, essentially, they're doing the right thing. They may be going about it all wrong, but they're doing the right thing. And that's what we have to really examine in it, is what is the motive behind what I'm doing? What is the driving factor behind what I'm accomplishing? Am I doing it with a pure heart? Paul, his overall attitude is one of joy instead of bitterness. And I love the fact that while he can't be going around town to town, starting churches and spreading the good news and spreading the gospel, he's stuck in a prison cell, chained to a palace guard. I love the fact that he's encouraging those who are reading his letter to say, hey, I may not be the guy doing it, but I'm rejoicing that it's still being done. I'm rejoicing in the fact that it's getting done. Believers are getting bolder in their faith. The palace guard is having to put up with me telling them. Everyone knows what this is all about. And because of it, we have to rejoice. So I'm going to give you 2 takeaways tonight, and then we're going to pray. Here are my takeaways. In bad situations, look for the good and rejoice in that. There's always something good that can be found. Whatever situation and circumstances you find yourself in life, try to find the good and rejoice in it. Try to find the good, rejoice in it. Here's the second thing. Rejoice with those who are getting the work done, even if it's not you. Even if it's not you doing it, you getting the credit, rejoice. Rejoice with them. That one's the hard one sometimes. Because by human nature, sometimes we like a little bit of credit. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's never about us. It's always about Him. It's always about Christ. It's always about Him. And if it's truly always about Him and never about us, then it doesn't matter who gets it done. We just got to rejoice in the fact that it got done. That lives were changed, people's hearts were touched, and the kingdom grew. His kingdom grew here on earth. Let's pray. Father, we love you.